If there's any race that Ferrari has to nail, it is this one. Even though they've got one arm time behind their back going into it. But hey, they've got some cool threads to look at and to, wipe away the tears. I don't like making fun of Ferrari since I was a major Ferrari fan during the Schumacher days, and as part of the team's now tradition of bringing something special for the Italian Grand Prix design-wise, Ferrari have gone blue once again in terms of their shirts and caps with a nice looking curved stitch. All of this in relation to Niki Lauda and his time with Ferrari and celebrating the 50th anniversary of his first world title with the Scuderia back in 1975. And there has been speculation as to whether or not they would be releasing some kind of livery associated with the 1975 champion. As of this recording, there hasn't been a confirmation of that, only the inclusion of some brand new merch, but I can also understand why Ferrari might be feeling just that little bit blue, because the comments made in the Italian press toward the team and Kimi Antonelli regarding last weekend have been nothing short of atrocious. Some publications saying that Ferrari is experiencing endless suffering and that they really were not rating Lewis Hamilton's performance the entire weekend at all, especially down to the fact that due to that really unnecessary mistake in just completely ignoring double waved yellows going to the grid, there's a 5-place grid drop, which may mean that, hey, even if Lewis gets into Q3, he won't be in the top 10, so the chances of points might be a little bit more difficult. I'm really doubting that we're going to be seeing a major upset like we saw last year, where Charles Leclerc got a surprise victory. So I don't really think that this brand new merch line in celebration of Monza and Niki Lauda is going to do much in terms of geeing up morale. All it's really going to be doing, I think, is going to be reminding the Tifosi of, oh yeah, those were the days when we could actually win world championships. This is not where I want Ferrari to be. I want them to be dueling McLaren. McLaren and Ferrari, they're the perfect rivals for each other. I want them to be firing on all cylinders. And I think it's something that Red Bull are also thinking about, that maybe the odds of them winning titles have long since departed them. But there is something that Laura Mekies has been commenting on recently, which has given me some hope that, you know what, their time together, Max and Laura, may actually be quite productive, because I have good news for you. Mekies has just revealed that Verstappen assured him of his commitment to the cause on day one. No beating about the bush, seemingly. That is a strong sign, that. It just makes me feel that Max Verstappen has now entered a brand new phase of maturation. That, sure, he is still the absolutely dominant, aggressive, relentless driver on the track, and he will go for it, as we saw at Zandvoort. I mean, the commitment in keeping the car pointed forward going into turn 3 of the opening lap, absolute legendary GOAT status right there. But it's also him acting as the stoic, imperious leader, the solid pair of hands, the bastion, the rock that Red Bull Racing really needs right now. He is not going to be abandoning them at the first sign of trouble, like many people speculated over the last year and a bit. We got to remember what Lewis Hamilton dealt with Mercedes. It was a good 2 seasons before he pulled the trigger and activated that Ferrari deal. And I also reckon that Max wants to make sure that Red Bull can operate on its own without his own supervision when the time does come that he chooses to move on to another team or out of Formula 1. And this is something that Mekies' statement really gives me some strong confidence for. So here it is for your consideration. He came to me on my first day of work and said, "Forget everything you read. I am and will stay with Red Bull, and I'm looking forward to the time we have ahead of us together." I can answer the question very simply. We have to build Max a fast car. If Max is a fast car, everyone will be happy. Max, those around him, and of course, us too. Now, okay. This is a very, very well-coordinated signal right here. It's a declaration to all that is concerned that Max is not going anywhere for 2026 and maybe not even into 2027, mainly aimed at Toto. It means that he's killing the rumours circuit for 2027 by putting Max's voice at the centre, like the Dutchman has been trying to do, but Horner arguably have been denying him fully. That therefore reduces the noise inside the ecosystem of Red Bull and maybe tells engineers to stop gaming out driver upheaval. It might actually go some way to explain why we saw so many job openings happening at Milton Keynes on LinkedIn. I think many people were reporting about like 40, 45 job listings being put up on that website. That may be an indicator that maybe if there were people that were very, very supportive of Horner and were really sad to see him go and maybe are not fully committed to Mekies' cause, that he's going, okay, I'm calling your bluff. If you don't like it, there's the door. Yeah, that is a very dangerous game that LawVS is playing, but he's not beating about the bush, and I'm pretty sure that Max would be okay with this, that everyone within Red Bull has to be fully committed to the cause, whoever is in charge. And also what I really like to see based on all of this is that loyalty is not determined by politics anymore, it's performance-based. That loyalty is defined by how good the car is, as it should be. It shouldn't be down to the perks and benefits that you get attached to the car. Build a fast car for Max, he will stay. Simple as. Doesn't really have to be complicated or any more complex than that. Technical execution rules all. Something that LawVS gets, and something I reckon helped transform racing bulls not into something that we saw last year, which was just a commercial billboard for Visa and Cash App. It's a way to justify aggressive upgrades and clean execution for everyone. There's one plain goal. The timing matters too. Having a conversation on the first day means that leadership sought buy-in early. That's going to steady staff who were a little bit worried about long-term direction, now that the boss from 2005 is no longer with them. And Red Bull is still a very, very well sought-after team, that there will be people who will want to step in. Juniors stepping up to the senior plate, and therefore Mekki's making sure that what they get is incredibly supportive and is not defined by internal drama. And it's also a point to Mercedes that Verstappen's not going to go over to them unless the W17 turns out to be an absolute rocket ship, and then maybe the W18 could be even more so. Or if the RB22 turns out to be a really, really sad case, then you might be justified in thinking that Max could leave. But anyway, you want to know a bit more about the track itself, so here you go, Monza. The track rewards two things above all else: low drag and stability under heavy braking. And I'm quite certain that many of you are familiar with this trend in your video games. Turn 1 at Monza, it's a classic for sim racers, for the wrong reasons. Unless you're Antonio Liuzzi that one year where you just completely ignore turn 1. That means you have to have really, really strong braking consistency, and you also have to have the skinniest of skinny rear wings. And not like Hispania that one year, who brought a Monaco spec wing to Monza. Monaco. They share the first two letters of each other, but you don't bring fat wings to Monza! And it also means that race day slipstreams and qualifying tows are going to be really essential, and that if you are trying to have the team with the best possible qualifying results, you need both cars in those particular sessions, especially Q3. If Max Verstappen wants to get anywhere, Yuki Tsunoda has to have a really good Saturday. Same goes for George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, although Kimi Antonelli is really, really not getting any kudos within Italy, even though Charles Leclerc and Fred Vasseur, the Scuderia, have actually said, hey, we're not mad with Antonelli at all. These things happen. Don't worry about it. But hey, based on the fact that we do see loads of drivers waiting in the pit lane instead of just bunching people up toward the end of Q3, we're not going to see what happened in 2019 again. Do you remember that year? That was so bad. Only 1 or 2 drivers actually got a second Q3 lap time in. Everyone else was timed out. That was so idiotic, am I right? I mean, it was embarrassing at the time, but it's amusing when you actually look back at it in the archives. And then in terms of Pirelli, they are bringing the same tyres as they did last year. C3 for the tyres, which Mercedes will really, really dig. C4 for the mediums, and then C5 for the softs. There you go. The weather, it's going to be sunny, dry, somewhat hot, 27, 28 degrees or something. A slightly 50-50 chance of rain on Friday morning. It might not affect the actual F1 sessions, maybe the F3 practice session at a pinch. But other than that, just expect it to be dry, somewhat hot, quite toasty, and just conventional. And don't forget, Monza isn't quite the same as it used to be. They flattened some of the curbs last year, which the drivers were a little bit mixed about. Ricciardo saying in particular that some of the heart and soul of that track had simply disappeared. That maybe it gotten a little bit too easy, because some of those bumps, as we saw in the Formula 1 movie, can send some cars flying or bouncing really, really hard. Admittedly, Joshua Pierce's car getting a little bit too dramatically up into the air, and that scene making Max Verstappen out to be the baddest of bad guys, but when Lewis Hamilton is the executive producer of that movie, you kind of get it. You can even take a look at my movie review from the other day. I don't think the qualifying tyre, the C5, is going to be used for the actual race, but it might throw some twists into the game if some people want to go for a cheeky soft tyre end stint if they can make the hards go really, really, really long, and they have a spare set to hand, like some people that go out in Q2. That's the most intriguing twist I can think of right now. The only other intriguing twist I think there might be is that there are some thunderstorm warnings from the Lombardy region where the Monza track is located. Austria had some of those, and Thursday was absolutely torrential. So you might be wondering who I think is also going to be scoring points before I get to my top 5 pick, and I do not think, and this is something I will tell you right now, Ferrari are going to be in that top 5, unless there's a freak event at the front where one of the McLarens is taken out, which we all thought wouldn't happen this time last week, but look what happened last Sunday! Let's be real. Even though the Scuderia are hoping they can repeat the shock win last year Ferrari Charles Leclerc had, he'll be hunting a home response after the Zandvoort clash too. The podium, it's not on the cards. Maybe a cheeky top 5 finish, but it would be cheeky, not confident. And while Monza may reset the mood somewhat because it's their home circuit, Ferrari's best realistic outcome looks like strong points from the second pack, unless qualifying chaos gives them a lockout of the first 2 rows and they can keep it clean. And if they can do that, I do think that Charles Leclerc may get what he was hoping he could get at the Dutch Grand Prix, 6th place, whereas with Hamilton, it really depends on what happens in qualifying. If he can get into Q3, he could easily be right behind Charles, but if he does go out in Q2, or if he's even worse out in Q1, then, I don't know, there could be a very small chance that Lewis is at the back, all for that simple mistake. It just reminds me of when Michael Schumacher had that really clumsy mistake with Bruno Senna at the Spanish Grand Prix, that 10-place grid penalty, which denied him pole position, starting on pole for the Monaco Grand Prix the following weekend. Even if Lewis Hamilton got a miraculous pole, he won't be starting pole, he'd be starting 6th. So that would be taking any sting out of Ferrari's hopeful bite if that were to happen. Sure, I can imagine that the Ferrari power unit will be good down the long straights, but downforce and low-speed turn-in are characteristics that are still hounding them. And overall spirits are low too, after not scoring a single point at the Dutch Grand Prix. And again, the press in Italy is at its worst, scathing Hamilton, giving Antonelli a lashing, despite Ferrari being forgiving with him. So yeah, it's a very, very negative time at the moment in Italy. And as for the other points finishers, Yuki Tsunoda's Red Bull should be quick in a straight line. Aston Martin's pair are starting to regularly grind out lower top 10 finishes, but at the same time they're still confused as to why they are where they are right now. And you've also got to consider, and the Sky Sports commentators did make a good point here, that the high downforce circuits that we've had in the last couple of weekends, Hungary and of course Zandvoort, were very, very forgiving. Low downforce remains to be seen. The Aston Martin may be simply too draggy to be able to get a double points finish again, but you can at least count one of them, maybe a tenacious Alonso trying to get some way back to Lance Stroll. And then Racing Bulls, this is technically their home circuit too. And I easily think that Isaac Hadjar could build on the momentum of his first ever podium last weekend. And Liam Lawson, he too will be quite motivated. He actually carried himself off in the wake of the incident with Sainz very well. Very diplomatic. Nothing like what he was doing at the back end of last year, where he was being really combative. He was very, very reserved almost, which is really good for him. He is changing the optics in his favour, which is a relief. And then Oliver Behrman, he got a tidy P6 at Zandvoort. There is some love for Oliver within the Italian press. He is affiliated with the Ferrari Driver Academy. He drove for Prema for the last couple of years before he got up to Formula One. So yeah, he is the heir apparent to Lewis Hamilton, I reckon, at that team. But enough of those particular places. You want to know who my top 5 are, so here they are for you right now. In 5th place, I am putting Alex Albon. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's a little bit bold, but quite honestly, this is not that much of a surprise considering that Alex has been in the top 5 before. You've also got to remember that he did that at Zandvoort, a really quite high downforce circuit. This Monza, this is singing absolutely from the hymn sheet that Williams has been singing from for the last several years at this point. And this could easily be the moment where Williams gets past their 2017 score tally and maybe gets towards the triple figures for the first time in nearly a decade. And also the fact they were able to do that at the Dutch Grand Prix, come back from Saturday, operationally speaking, and then rise up 10 positions. Maybe they are getting their act together in terms of race day operations and administration, and maybe we might start to see less of what Alex was going on over the radio about them not knowing what they were doing. What also will be really intriguing is that car, in comparison to 2024, is lighter. It's also a little bit more reliable after having a little bit of a wobble. They have done some tweaks in the intervening races since that hat-trick of DNS for Alex. So I do think the odds of them doing really well on top of them being really proficient at low downforce circuits, I think a top 5 is perfectly reasonable. And when you give Albon a car that is really slippery and stable on the brakes, I think he can easily work wonders. P5 could easily turn to a P4 if George Russell has some trouble. I mean, the risks are perfectly obvious. There is no guarantee that Williams can qualify in the top 5. He might have to qualify near the bottom end of 10th in, well, P10. He would ideally need Carlos Sainz right by his side, and this is something we've rarely seen in 2025. We have seen a couple of times where they've qualified relatively close to each other within the top end of Q2, bottom end of Q3, but we need to see more of that. They can offer each other some toes. Oh, that could throw some real big cats amongst the big pigeons. And I'm slotting Alex into P5 on the grounds that it is going to be a dry, warm Monza. The one stop is very much going to be key. The soft tyres are going to be entirely committed to qualifying. There aren't really that many variables to get in the way of the suspicion that Williams will be really good on a power circuit. And if there is a virtual safety car or even a full safety car and they time their pit stops correctly, apparently the pit stops at the Dutch Grand Prix were actually in sync with the safety cars when they actually did land, there is a really good case of maybe a P4, but not quite enough for me to fully commit to predicting a 4th place. That 4th place going to the same guy who got it last time out, George Russell. I doubt that Russell will be able to get any higher than P4 unless there's a huge incident at the front which maybe gets him a podium. Not saying that he'd be gifted it, but he'd be just right there at the right time like Isaac was last time out. You've just got to look at the entire season in of itself, and Russell has been right there in the background just waiting for the opportunity and capitalizing it on many cases if a McLaren falters or if Verstappen has a really bad time of it and then the Ferraris equally have a little bit of a malady. Russell is right there to make the most of it. Even though the W16 last time out, it wasn't really able to do anything in the top 3. The team acknowledged it. The best it could really do was scrap with Charles Leclerc for a while before it sustained damage, but even though the W16 isn't the most slippery of cars, it does seem to be quite dependable on the brakes, which is going to be very, very important for Monza, as you may be aware. I wouldn't be surprised if we see George going long on maybe a short, aggressive, hard, medium first stint to maybe put some pressure on the top 3, then deciding with the hards to go long for the undercut, preserve the tyres, go easy on the braking, and therefore may be able to eke out a long hard stint, trying to get a few more seconds on the front. But slipstream management is going to be important here. Again, Mercedes are going to need both drivers in Q3 for this to be worked out perfectly, for George to be able to slot into P4 quite easily and maybe have some backup. Because if that doesn't happen, I could easily see if Williams are able to get both their cars into Q3, that Sainz and Albon together might get at least one of those cars, the FW47, in front of the W16, or maybe one of the Racing Bulls. Considering that Ferrari have got a lot on their plate at the moment and Norris is entirely focused on Piastri, Russell could be there to cause an upset, but very quietly so. And speaking of Lando Norris, I am slotting him into P3 because, make no bones about it, even though the Dutch crowd were really supportive of him and were very conciliatory, he suffered a gut punch that weekend. He took it fairly well. The worst that we actually heard was him wanting just a burger or something, which isn't all that egregious. We all could do with a burger every now and again when we're feeling a little bit low. But the surrounding form of Lando is still very elite. He needs to pick himself up again. The reality is, though, is that he is trailing Piastri by 34 points. If Piastri were to suffer a DNF, which is entirely possible, plausible even, then it might just completely reset the balance and Lando will be right back in it again. But at the moment, it is a bit of a mountain to try and climb. If we get yet more McLaren 1-2s, Lando is going to have to win 5 races to get back ahead of Oscar, with 9 races to go. I think he is very aware of the challenge ahead of him, and also Monza hasn't really been a particularly kind circuit to him in terms of optics and prospects. 2021 getting really close, but Daniel Ricciardo obviously had the advantage that time out. He was the bigger of the 2 drivers at the time, so Lando had to acquiesce. But even with all of that, the car that he is in and the specification he has is quick enough to get him pole. I don't think he's out of contention for that first place slot. It is entirely within his ability to do so. But you might be wondering why I am putting him in 3rd though. Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. First, Norris has really paid the price when he has over-attacked things and had to really overdrive the car, which we have seen at the beginning of the year when he was on the back foot, when he was a fair ways away behind Piastri. Now, at the biggest gap that he's had the entire season, he might be susceptible to overdriving unless he has gotten on top of that and he is actually self-aware. And second, if both McLaren cars are free to race, then don't be surprised that Max Verstappen is an opportunist in this particular moment, as we saw at the Dutch Grand Prix. I know I keep referring to Zandvoort a lot, but not only are we really starved for Formula 1 content, but also it really did tell us a lot of things that we could expect to see going into the second half of the season. Verstappen may be back on his game and maybe have enough in the tank with a car that they might continue to upgrade to try and get some headway into next year. He could easily be an interrupting force. Not in contention for the title. Oh, he's saying that that's long gone. He's not thinking about that. He's thinking on a race-by-race basis, which is perfectly reasonable and pragmatic, but it still means that he is in contention to try and ruin the party for McLaren. But that being said, I think the C4 will be quite good for Lando. It might mean he can be aggressive in the opening act, which could mean that if Piastri still is ahead of him, it could keep hounding him and making him push a little bit harder, because the name of the game of Piastri is not big advantages behind everyone else. It's more to do with just tyre management. And if Lando can force Oscar to not do that, that might pay off later on in the race. So I'm only docking him one place in terms of second due to probability. It's not down to raw pace or anything like that. And of course, Max Verstappen being a thing, and actually really appreciating the summer break. Sure, even though the peak of the Red Bull racing car isn't the dominant force that we saw last year and the year before that, it might have enough to be able to do more than what we saw at Hungary, where it could barely score any points at all. I don't think it's going to get as bad as that. And if execution is clean and the wing is really skinny, I wouldn't be surprised to, well, see any surprises from Max himself. We saw that upset at Silverstone when they banked on low downforce, and wouldn't you know it, he put it on pole. The only thing that stopped him back then was the weather. Well, the weather isn't going to be playing any part in the Grand Prix itself, and most importantly, if Max can get the good draft into turn 1 and jump Piastri, he can do what he can do best. Dictate the pace, chew up Oscar's tyres, because Piastri's major weakness right now is dealing with dirty air. And if Max can do that and spoil his party, oh, then Max could go on to win the thing. But it's all down to the start. If that does not happen, then Max may not have a leg to stand on in terms of the leading car. I really think that Yuki has to be there with him in Q3. This is going to be very important. They will work together. Nekis will reinforce that both of them are in it to help Red Bull get back in touch with third or even second place in the Constructors, which they did do. Yuki and Max scored 20 points last time out. Ferrari scored zilch. And also, I think it's going to be very important for Max to get a good banker lap in, because we might see an upset where the second lap time is not as fast as the first one. We've seen this a few times in 2025 and last time out as well. So if Max can do the business first time out when many people are ramping things up, that might be an upset in of itself. So there are many things attached to Max being on the front row, but I do think if he can do that, the second place is plausible. And yeah, the simplest read is sometimes the most correct one, and that being Oscar Piastri is going to win the Italian Grand Prix, because it's really my honest opinion that Oscar could have gone on to win last year's Italian Grand Prix had Ferrari not just kept Charles Leclerc out and then found themselves in first place and then stayed there. Many people criticising McLaren for not playing bold in terms of pit stops for their Australian guy, to build upon the momentum of him winning his first race in Hungary. Fortunately, Oscar went on to win Baku, but you're getting what I'm getting at here, right? And Oscar's going to be coming into this with championship momentum, which is something he didn't have last year. And may I remind you, the McLaren car is the class act of the entire field and something that Oscar really digs, something that he builds up upon on the Friday and then the Saturday and then the Sunday is the peak. And at Zandvoort, he really committed. Didn't put a foot wrong. He got his first Grand Slam at Zandvoort, one of the trickiest circuits on the grid, and you do that? And with Monza, there is an easy chance to get into a bit of a groove. You blap it, you brake, you turn, you go again. It's very formulaic, it's historic, but it's not the most groundbreaking of circuits. So if Piastri can get a pole and still keep it going into the first lap, then, oh yeah, I think it's a done deal, especially down to the fact that in terms of the pit stop strategies, there really isn't much call for a split one other than maybe who gets the undercut, which historically McLaren has afforded to the guy in front of the other one. And with McLaren, they've been really developing aerodynamic efficiency since for the last couple of seasons, one of their biggest weaknesses is having a really draggy rear wing, which had been a real problem and gave Red Bull an advantage when it was looking a little bit more difficult Max getting his fourth title. That is until Mini DRS showed up, which really threw a spanner in the works, a spanner as big as this one, for Red Bull Racing, because one of their biggest advantages was starting to slip away with them, DRS efficiency especially. And you still see that in the speed traps that McLaren are near the bottom. They still rely heavily on downforce. I really don't see Oscar really putting a foot wrong, honestly, and him getting into double figures in terms of victories. There are no major variables. It's very, very predictable. It's something that is standard. There are less likely to be concerns of rain or what have you. The only thing that could maybe spoil his surprise is a safety car. And we got 2 of them last time out, and that didn't bother him at all. He learnt very much from his gaffe at Silverstone, which did arguably cost him the win. No, it definitely did cost him the win. And if degradation turns out to be lower than he expected, because he does say clean air is king, if he can make good use of that clean air, he might decide to go long on the mediums and therefore have a little bit more rubber on the hards later on. And also, McLaren still trusts both drivers to race each other fairly. Papaya rules are still in effect, and that'll be very important to consider if Lando does have the meat on his tyres to be able to go after Piastri, or if he has to overextend and maybe do something drastic, which Piastri has had to do, like in Austria and Hungary. I know that some of you may not want me to go on about that stuff, but it did happen. We saw the footage. Lando might be in that position if he is able to get within a snifter like we saw at the back end of Zandvoort. Before his engine went bang. The only way I think Oscar could be denied this or maybe have to work a little bit harder is if Norris gets a tow of some effect from another car, or if that same tactic is employed by Tsunoda and Verstappen. Those are the only 2 things I can think that could rain on, Piastri's parade, because the rain up there is not going to be troubling them. That being the only spanner in the works right now. And the only spanner in the works that you might have is deciding which video of mine to watch next. Well, I think this one will tickle your fancy. I'll be right back to show you. I've just got to go and change my clothes.